In an age where dinky versions of classic beloved systems are clearly in fashion, the Sega Genesis Mini is undoubtedly the best all-in-one retro console ever made. With a lineup of 42 mostly quality games, great UI and software handled by legendary software company M2, catchy menu music, and some trademark M2 surprises, this is the high watermark against which all retro mini consoles should be measured going forward. The tiny Sega Genesis Mini takes its design very seriously. The included Genesis controllers look and feel like the real deal, and my first thought on holding one in my hands after all these years was, wow, these things are big. It's a bummer the superior 6-button controllers aren't included, but for basically 40 of the 42 games, the packing controllers work fine. The only real exceptions are Street Fighter 2 and Eternal Champions, but honestly, you're only going to play Eternal Champions once anyway. The main menu screen is a delight. When the Genesis Mini starts up, the game icons burst from the center of the screen and take their places in the UI. A catchy, custom tune by Streets of Rage 2 composer Yuzo Koshiro plays over the main menu, and you can sort the games alphabetically, by release date, genre, or number of players. It's all fully animated too, and there's even an option to sort the games by spine. Yeah, sure, why not? In the screen settings, there's an option to play 4:3 or 16:9, although you'd have to be a cop to play 16:9. There's no pixel perfect option, which is weird since almost all other emulation software includes it, but you can toggle a CRT filter on or off. Scanlines on retro games are always a nice touch, one I frequently opt into, but turning this option on also makes the games a little darker than I expected. With the Sega Genesis Mini, Sega went for quantity and quality, giving us exactly twice as many games as the SNES Classic. While the list is chock full of familiar Genesis classics like Sonic, Shining Force, Toe Jam and Earl, and Echo the Dolphin, M2 and Sega went ahead and added a few games never before released on Western shores, like the Genesis version of Tetris. There are hundreds, probably thousands of hours of gameplay locked inside. It's a super solid lineup, spanning a wide release period and including games you will definitely expect, like Sonic and Sonic 2, the games you maybe sorta kinda remember, like Alicia Dragoon, right up to Tetris for the Sega Genesis. I did occasionally notice some weird emulation glitches, particularly in Sonic. One example, if you capture a Chaos Emerald in one of the bonus levels, it blinks in and out of existence on the score screen in an unpredictable pattern. Weird but infrequent emulation issues aside, the games you remember fondly won't disappoint. It's really hard to find fault with this lineup, even if some of the earlier games like Altered Beast and Golden Axe are pretty clunky. And you can probably skip this version of Tetris, new or not. It's just not good. There are other Genesis games included with the collection you may have never played before due to the fact they weren't widely released. Mega Man The Wily Wars, a 16-bit remaster of the first 3 NES Mega Man games, was a Sega Channel exclusive. The Genesis Mini gives us a chance to visit the US versions of games nearly impossible to obtain otherwise. You actually get even more content when you change the language options in the system menu, which changes the version of each game over to whatever region you select. It's such an unexpectedly cool addition, and it lets you easily compare the tiny differences between versions. It's so completely unnecessary, and I love it. The Sega Genesis Mini is the closest thing we have to a perfect all-in-one mini console so far. There are a few weird emulation issues here and there, but the sheer number of games and its delightful interface far outshines any graphical hiccups in these classic games. The quiet inclusion of different ROMs for different regions is one of those things that makes no sense at all to include, while simultaneously making it feel even more lovingly crafted and special. Apart from being limited to 3-button controllers, it's hard to find much to really dislike here. Even if I was more of an SNES kid growing up, the Sega Genesis Mini is now my favorite retro mini console. For even more retro console reviews, check out our SNES Mini review or our NES Classic review. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.